so welcome to week one in CIT 93 JavaScript. I love JavaScript if I haven't already said it. So for week one attendance, there's going to be a few things you're going to do. One is I'm going to go over what the work that you have due for this week, and you can already see it here. I'm actually looking at Canvas as a student, and so you have opened up at this point week one, which means you got through the first week 0 items, which should be pretty doable. And now we're on to attendance. So you'll also have, as soon as you finish attendance, okay, and I'll talk about this in a little more detail, but then you'll set up your development environment. You'll have a thing you'll submit, actually two things there, and then you'll move on to the last item of the week, which is who's in the house. Okay, so again, these things in sequence, and hopefully by week 2 you'll start to get used to this. Now, I just reviewed a few minutes ago the welcome, and I realized I had something in the welcome I forgot to talk about, so I'm going to start with that. Is I don't recommend students take CIT 93, this class, and CIT 28 at the same time. And now, could you take 82, which is Intro to Web Development, in this class? Yeah, those could be paired fine depending on the rest of your schedule. I just don't recommend, and I for sure don't recommend taking CIT 28, SQL, Intro to Databases, 82, Intro to Web Development, and JavaScript on the same semester. I just don't recommend it. So if you want to chat about it, let me know, but I just don't. Now, let's talk about this week one. So here's what you're going to do. In this week one, you're based on what you did in the welcome, you gave me your GitHub username. So what I do is I come over to GitHub and I invite you. I actually will use that GitHub username that you've given me. And then as soon as I do this, you will get an email saying you've been invited. Okay. Now, the timing of that, and I mentioned that a little bit, is the sooner, and this is really, and maybe what I should do here is step back and talk about the fact, and I didn't even show this, that this attendance item is due on the first day of the semester. So these two items are due on Thursday night. So our normal Monday night, Thursday night schedule is already intact for this week. And this is something you'll get used to. But the thing I would really recommend is you do get the setup development environment done. The sooner the better. In case you run into any issues here, I do recommend a Windows or a Mac computer. If you have a Linux computer and you have that experience, cool. I don't use Linux every day. I've used it in my life. It's very doable. It's just something I don't use every day. I have used Chromebooks to do these setup, but I also give you alternatives, which I will talk about in a minute, for setting up your development environment. Okay, so that's first thing, is understand that I would recommend after you do this attendance, you go ahead and check out and start looking at, and you're going to see me do this here, what is going to be, what you're going to do for setting up the development environment. But you got to accept that invite in order to do it. That's the other thing, is not only timing is an issue. The sooner you give me your username, the sooner I can invite you, the sooner you can start on setting up that environment, because without the invite, without you being a part of the organization, you can't. And so I've provided a link here. I actually also provided it in the setup of the development environment, the next item, for if you didn't, for some reason I said, hey, I invited you, but you didn't see it, you can click here. Okay? All right, so what is a development environment? It's basically an IDE, and in this case, an integrated development environment is a piece of software. In this case, we'll use VS Code. And this VS Code is very common. Matter of fact, I would say it's the industry standard. Now, not everyone loves it, but many people use it. And so if you choose local, which I'll talk about the differences here in a minute, right, you'll be using VS Code. If you choose CodeSpace, you'll also be using VS Code, but it'll be out on the web. So local, you'll install the app. If you're using the cloud, and that's actually an image I have here, right, is the local, and it shouldn't be local versus cloud. It's generally you have options. And so here's what I would, and might as well go ahead and move into this topic now. And I'll look at the instructions in a minute about which one should you choose. I can't tell you, but I can tell you the pros and cons. Like, so for local, what's great about local is that even if for some reason I didn't have internet access, I could do my work. Okay, now if I didn't have internet access, it'd probably be hard to see some of the instructions, so there'd be a downside to that. But having the experience of setting it up on your local machine is something that if you're taking my intro, my 82 class, you'll hear me say, I want you to walk away from that class actually having that experience. So knowing how to install, use command line on whatever operating system you're using is a good skill to have. Okay. The other thing, which is kind of the cloud-based solution. So cloud-based in this case is GitHub provides to us, and it's really Microsoft provides us as part of our GitHub account, this thing called a code space. So it's basically a virtual computer out in the cloud that you can use that will feel very similar if you happen to at some point deal with both to what is local. Matter of fact, you'll see me at the end of this week actually show instruction in both, and you will start to see, I hope, how very similar they are once you get into actually doing the code. Now, the downside of the code space is A, you're very dependent on the internet, and B, there is a time limit for how many hours you can get. You get, as part of your base GitHub account, you get 120 hours. You can upgrade this. I'll talk about this in the setup instruction. But in that case, you have a limit. Now, I've only had a couple of students last semester hit up against that limit. And honestly, the reason they were doing it is they weren't having good code space etiquette. And what that means is they were just leaving those tabs open. And for various reasons, they'd go back to them but never stop them. And that time, that 120 hours, and that's per month, starts to tick. Okay, so having good hygiene, I would say, around your code space will definitely make that 120 doable, and then you could expand it to 160 by getting a verified educational account, which I also recommend. Okay. So in this next setup, you're going to do this. So let's actually preview the next item, and then I'll come back here. Okay, so, oh yeah, so actually I can't. I'm as a student because I haven't done the reply yet. So let me actually leave. Oh yeah, and actually you may see that sometime along this way. So when you get to, after doing the reply, you will have now seen me go over this. So what you will see here is for both local and code space, you share a step one as far as how to set up your repos. You're going to set up a private repo and a public repo. Okay. And then if you're choosing local, you'll install VS Code, you'll install Git, you'll clone the repos, you'll configure GitHub, and you'll learn the workflow, the GitHub workflow. So if you're doing code space, then you can jump over this, go right to code space. And all I've done here is created links that are to content and videos in this same page. So when you come here, you would create your code space. Now, you're creating two repos, a public and a private, okay? So if you're doing code space, you'll end up creating a repo for each one, or actually a code space for each one. Yeah, you end up creating a repo on that first step for both public and private anyway. Now the GitHub workflow is very similar, but I ended up breaking out those videos because there was some differences, and it turned out the video I recorded that actually shared that content I didn't think was well done. So in this case, if you're doing code space, you'll learn the GitHub workflow, and then you'll both do, and I should put this here, local and code space, for whichever option you've chosen for how to submit this assignment, right? For how to submit this specific assignment. I'm not going to go over the detail here. This actually is why I've organized this content the way it is. And then at the very end, this video will walk you through how to submit that. Okay, now let me go back here because I think there's something I kind of touched on, but I think it's worth saying as well. If you're a student that doesn't have a certain comfort level with installing and doing command line, running command line on your computer. Or if you haven't, if you don't plan on doing web development and you are not going to take 82, and maybe you're just here because you're taking this for some other program or degree you're in, and even if for whatever reason you kind of just want to get started without doing the whole install locally, choose CodeSpace, right? Because it's easy. It's easier. Honestly, I work locally. I don't work out on CodeSpace except when I want to show us particular thing. But generally, starting after this week, you'll see me code locally because it just works better for my workflow. But I also don't want to have you have an impediment or anything that gets in your way. So maybe if you're like, I just want to get started and get through this, then choose code space. So I put local versus cloud based. So in this case, the cloud base is code space. Okay, so I hope that gives you some information. So here's the review. You're gonna accept the GitHub organization invite. You're gonna create a public and a private repo. If you're doing local, you're going to set up you're gonna install some software. You're gonna clone locally. You're going to learn the GitHub workflow. If you're doing code space, you'll set up 2 code spaces, and you'll also learn the GitHub workflow. Okay, so now what do you need to do for this work, right? Because as I said in the overview, attendance does have some, it is part of the grade in this case. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to reply to this telling us which you will select the setup for your development environment, right? Cloud or local. Remember, cloud is code space, right? And then, why? If you have a reason. Now, can you change your mind? Absolutely. And there may be situations where you've set up code space, but later on you might want to do the local install. I would just say start with one now. When you get comfortable or if you have a change, come talk to me. I'd love to chat with you about that. So replying with that content, 20 points. Then tell us a little bit about yourself and the reason you're taking this course, right? Please include a degree or pathway if possible. So if you have, I'm meeting this requirement for this program, or hey, I'm part of the web development, or hey, I'm just here to learn programming. I think that's cool too. Now, and then the last part of this, before the replies, is I want you to click on this, which is an MDN, Mozilla Development Network, is the definitive guide to JavaScript from the reference, and also their instruction, like their tutorials have gotten much better. So what I want you to do is read through this page. I get that there's a lot of content, okay? But I want you to read through it. And because there's going to be things, some of it we'll cover, some of it we may not. But understanding what is JavaScript, because this is what you're going to do in this class, is learn JavaScript. So understand a little about it, right? So read through this. Let's see how long. It's not that bad, okay? It's honestly not that bad. Okay, so once you read through it, then do some research on a topic you want to understand and post what you used. Now, so in this case, you could use ChatGPT, you could use Gemini, you could use Google, you could use something, right? So tell us, what did you choose, right? What was your topic? What did you choose to do the research? And then what did you learn? And here's probably the more important thing is, do you have any questions or comment about what you learned? Right? Because the goal of this class is for you to learn JavaScript. So let's start now. Understanding what is JavaScript. It is the programming language of the web. Now, it's the most popular on the web, but there are definitely things that are starting to compete for sure. And we'll talk about some of that as we go through the course. So in this case, in addition to those topics, you got to include reply to 2 of your classmates with substantive replies, right? 10 points for each of those replies. And really just, the idea here is we're taking online classes and, feeling like you get to know people in a classroom is really important. So this is the equivalent that we have here. The thing I would leave you with is the importance of working on setting up your dev environment early. Where ultimately we end up in the week is you've set up your dev environment and you're going to learn how to locally or on CodeSpace actually run the required files, an index and a main.js, a JavaScript file, to look at your work in a HTML, what we think of as a web page, depending on your experience level. And this is where we end up as far as the end of the week. All right, I hope this helps you understand what you need to do. Please reach out if you have any questions. I'm excited for us to get started, so now's the time.